Doug, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. It's an honor to be with you today.
I'm excited to talk about this today's topic because it is one that I think not enough people are having a conversation about this. We're talking about addiction to screens, more or less. I think personally that it's because so many of us, to varying degrees, are addicted to our screens, and we don't want to admit it, and we don't want to admit the impact that it could have on the next generation. We're going to get into that, but before we do, tell everybody watching and listening a little bit about yourself as a husband and a dad, and even your professional background, because I think it's pretty relevant to today's discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much. So yes, I'm a Christian. I'm a husband and a dad to four daughters, four grown daughters. Super proud of them. They're all married, and we've got some grandkids, and it's a wonderful phase of life. I started when I was about 6 years old having kids, so that's why I'm so young still. But actually, just saying it out loud, it's funny to think about where God has brought me during this time. So love my family. In fact, in the first part of the book, I dedicated this to them because I want them to live intentionally in our screen saturated world. I want the next generation. That's my heart as a dad and a husband. And I see us all affected by it. So that really drove me to this. But yeah, I'm also a lifelong software developer. I've worn many different hats on many different industries, from large Fortune big companies to governments and to small startups. And as I sit today, I've been working for the last 2 years at Covenant Eyes, which is one of the largest internet pornography addiction recovery accountability software tools, and I'm their lead Android developer today. So I'm very much engaged in the technical side of the battle, but as a lifelong also Bible student, I've also been very much engaged in the more biblical side of the battle, I guess I would say. And then I've done a lot of mentoring and teaching, and that's that angle, meeting with a lot of guys, seeing where we all live. And I have a story of my own of overcoming things. And so all that wrapped together to bring me to this place where I needed to say something, and a book came out of that.
Right on. Well, you answered one of my questions right off the bat. It was like, what kind of led to writing a book? And that's interesting to hear. The book is named Unintentional: How Screens Secretly Shape Your Desires and How You Can Break Free. So I think your title hits the nail right on the head in terms of we're not intentional in how we spend our time on screens. And I'll be the first to raise my hand. Like, I know that I don't want to use the word addicted, but I feel like I am, to a certain degree, a little addicted to that dopamine rush. And there have been many times where I've found myself like, oh my gosh, I just spent an hour scrolling through Instagram. That is pathetic.
Yep.
That's hard for me to admit out loud and to this audience, but I'm as guilty as anybody. And it's very easy to find yourself addicted, for lack of a better word, because I think that's what it is.
It truly is, Mark. It's not the reason I called the book Unintentional is not only that we're unintentional, but as you can tell in the way the title's written, the is kind of bracketed out.
Yeah. I'll hold the cover up for people watching here.
Yeah. So the is bracketed out. And the reason for that is that going into the book, we have to understand we're unintentional, but the industry is extremely intentional, like over the top, billions of dollars, millions of hours, trillions of individual experiments run on us to see what works to keep us addicted. So the fact that we run across and find ourselves accidentally spending an hour on whatever is not accident from their standpoint. They 100%. Are super intentional. And so the book's goal is to flip what I call an intentionality imbalance, where we need to go to become more intentional with our lives than the industries who are profiting from our lack of intentionality.
Well, what I like about this book, and I think that the audience will appreciate it, is you unpack some hard-hitting facts about screen addiction, but then you look at recovery sort of through the lens of biblical principles.
That's
which
right.
I think is very important. And again, that's one of the reasons why I really like this book. and I'm going to be recommending it to friends and family.
Mhm.
But I think that because we are unintentional, we don't think about the long-term consequences. And I like how you broke down the consequences of screen addiction. And maybe we should just clarify, like, what screens are we talking about? It's not just smartphones and tablets, right?
That's right. It is. It's all forms of really intentionally addictive entertainment types of screens. Broadly speaking, social media, video games, and streaming video platforms. Those are the things that are truly optimized to be habit forming, obsession forming, and then, the definition of addiction is, there's a controversy around that term in terms of a clinical definition, but it does rise to that in many people's lives, to a true clinical definition. And yet, you're right. You mentioned the dopamine cycle. That is a reality for all of the triggers that lead us to spending time on all these screens, whether they're small or large. Obviously, the smartphone, because it's with us all the time, that's really where I guess I would say 80% of the battle lies, especially on the younger generation. But it is screens of all sizes with that content in mind, especially on the video game side, since obviously people want to play on larger platforms as well.
Yeah, I had a guy by the name of Cam Adair on the show a couple of years ago, I think, and he's an expert on video game addiction specifically. And he talked about, similar to content online in general, the video game industry is like a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they have invested millions, probably billions, in figuring out how do we make this thing addictive.
That's right.
Specifically, like, they hire doctors and scientists and people who are experts in how our brains operate and think, to like, how do we make this really addictive? And
Yes.
real quick, I'm not going to edit this out of the episode, but I've got to reset my video because when I held that book up, it got my my camera got all blurry on me.
Oh, gotcha. Sure.
All right. So we're just keeping it real here. There we go.
Yep.
So I mentioned there are consequences of too much screen time and screen addiction. And I like how you broke those down. I'll just list them off here: distraction, uncivil discourse, mocking, sexualization, and making deep thought really impossible. And I do think I agree with all of those. And I don't know if those came out of your head or if those are sort of like industry standard, but I think they're accurate. And distraction is a really big one for me, because you and I both know, as Christians, Satan wants us distracted.
That's right.
When we are distracted, that's when he can make his move. And that's when we're subject to sin and, stumbling big time in our life. And I think that's such a huge, huge factor when we talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. The distraction part, and that really does dovetail with the last one, the deep thought impossible. And then you're right. As you know, in chapter 4, I go into the real spiritual, the spiritual dimension of this all that we don't really want to talk about and think about, that we have an enemy, the prince of the power of the air, the Bible calls him. And which is ironic given that all of this stuff is happening over the air, right? But it's amazing to think about how we have to be distracted. It's not just that we're distracted, but we're not comfortable in our own thoughts. We're not comfortable with a few minutes of boredom. Oh, wow, I've got 5 minutes to do what? Oh, what's on Twitter? And that, again, that's programmed by them. That's programmed by the industry. They want to be first to mind. They don't want us to be bored. They don't want us to be. So then, when does the Holy Spirit have a chance to say, hey, Doug, you haven't really been spending the time with me or with your wife or with, on the important things of life? Oh, never mind, Lord, later I got to check what's on my email. That's where we all live.
Yeah, 100%. And I see that in my son, who's 13, big time. And again, I'm probably not any better, because I know that there are times where I found myself checking my phone for no reason at all. So it's
exactly,
like looking for a mental break. But when I see him do it, it's like it catches my attention. And I'm like, especially in the car, like if we're just running an errand, I'm like, buddy, just turn your phone off. You should be able to sit in the car for 10 minutes without looking at your phone.
Right.
And I think that boredom, that's a skill that we never really realized was a skill, a life skill. Like growing up, in the 80s, being bored at times was just part of life, because we were living a fairly analog lifestyle. And that was just part of life. You didn't really even think about it. But now it's like you said, there's constant distractions. and being able to intentionally turn them off and be comfortable in our own thoughts, I think is, like you said, it's a skill that we're losing in society.
It is. It is. And it breaks my heart. I think about, the future people who are who have at least the capacity to do the incredible things that have been done in the past. The future C.S. Lewis, who's too distracted by Fortnite to be able to develop their story making skills because they can't dream about the other worlds, or the
Right.
future girl who's got the skills to cure cancer, and she's just because she's got the mind for it, she's got the skills, and yet she's way too concerned about her Instagram persona and impressing her friends and
Right.
using her gifts for that. So what are
How
we
many, how
losing?
many, how many of the world's problems have been solved because people had the time to just sit and contemplate and reflect and study? Yeah,
Absolutely right. It's
very,
hurting us. We don't even know. We don't even know what we're losing.
yeah. And like you
Yeah,
said, this kind of does overlap with the distraction, but it's like, we can't grow in our relationship with God if we're constantly distracted,
that's
right?
right.
A lot of our time alone with God is just sitting still in a quiet room and listening for his voice.
That's right. Yeah, that's a classic spiritual discipline, silence, which is unheard of. The idea that you'd be silent before the Lord. Like, what would I do? Well, just be quiet and listen.
Mhm.
What's that? We don't ever do that anymore, right? And so what, again, we've lost that intimacy. And it's no wonder then that a lot, especially, you look at the troubling trends of people leaving the church and they don't have an experience of God that is keeping them realizing that, wow, I I could have a connection with the creator of the universe. Uh, but there's, something more important on Pinterest.
Right.
It's
Yeah. And when you put it in those terms, it's like, are you sacrificing your eternity for 60 seconds of dopamine rush
right,
compounded by, hours and hours every month?
right. Not on purpose, right? Not
Right.
intentionally. When you start looking at the numbers, like, we see the 8 hours a day average that we went up to during the pandemic. And you think to yourself, man, when I grow up, I just want to give the best hours of my life to the most powerful corporations in the world so they can analyze my personal data and use it against me. Like,
Mhm.
nobody signed up for that, right? We didn't intend, we wanted to be, you know, we wanted to be astronauts. We wanted to be firefighters. We wanted to be warriors. We wanted to be whatever. And we're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a business owner, I often find myself thinking about not having enough time in the day,
Hmm.
but then I look at my screen time and it's like, well, there's your answer, bud. You spent a couple hours on social media when you could have been working on the business. So you're not as busy as you think you are.
Right. And yet we feel it all the time, right? You even mentioned earlier, I need a mental break. And a mental break, first thing comes to mind is what they want us to think, that whichever our go-to app is. But that's
Mhm.
not it ends up not being a mental break, and we feel anxious. And so you look at even the statistics of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, even especially younger, self-harm and suicidality.
Yeah.
Those things have trended up with device usage. And because we don't get a mental break, we actually get mental exhaustion,
Mhm.
and we feel tired all the time, like we're working all the time, we're busy, busy, busy. We can't, but it's actually because of the treadmill we're on.
Yeah. 100%. Which is why I'm always blown away at how many parents are buying cell phones for their kids at a younger and younger age.
Hmm.
My kid was my son, who's 13 now, but he had friends who had like really brand new smartphones in like fourth and fifth grade.
Oh, I know. It's
Insane.
tragic. It's so tragic because their minds are being formed now around that. You think
Yeah.
about the brain and the brain science around this. I have my good friends at screenstrong.com. They do kind of the aspect of this from the more medical side. And you think about kids' brains are forming, the time of a life when we're learning languages, the time of life when we're learning, musical instruments, sports. We're building this muscle memory, and those things get wired in at young age. Why? Because our brains are exploding with potential.
Yep.
And again, they know that. So, they put parental controls on the devices. Why? Not because it works, but because we then think it's a child's product. I've seen it. I've seen car seats with iPad mounts,
Yeah.
For infants. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
I had never really thought about the parental controls from that angle before. It's more of a marketing gimmick than anything, isn't it?
I call it propaganda, because I tend to try to push things a little bit in the book to make people see it. And when you think about it in those terms, it truly fits the definition of propaganda, in terms of just making something you tell us over and over again enough times, and we get used to the idea. Oh, okay, I guess this is a kid's product. I guess YouTube Kids is a kid's platform. No, that's the drug. That's the drug dealer giving your kid a free hit, so that when they, so
100%.
it's that exactly. Because as you look at the brain science, the same things are happening in our brains when we're addicted to screens as that happens when we're addicted to drugs.
Yeah. That's scary. This whole topic is scary. And I think that's another reason why people don't like to talk about it. Because,
right.
I
know that's true. And one of the guys, I when going through the process of writing the book, I had, a critique group and a bunch of guys that were giving me feedback. And one of the guys says, "This scares the cheese whiz out of me." I'm like, I know, I'm not, it's not the intent necessarily. And in fact, only the first 4 chapters are really like that. Out of 12. The rest of them are really a grace-filled, hopeful, like, you can do this. We have the tools to do this. In fact, Christians have known how to do this for years. We've had stuff. It's never been quite this overwhelming, I don't think, but we've had our temptations and trials to deal with. And so it is doable. So I don't want people listening to go, "Oh man, turn this off. You're scaring me already." And no, there is hope. There is help. There is availability. It does require us to live differently, but it always has. We've always had to be countercultural as Christians.
And I want people to get this book so they can read it for themselves and get that, that grace-filled approach, that biblical approach to overcoming this stuff. But today I want this to be a wake-up call to people listening.
Sure.
That we can't shrug this off. We can't think that it's impacting other people and not us. This is in our face, and it's here to stay, obviously. I'm just flipping through the book right now. There are a couple pages that I had earmarked here. You talk about evil by design, and I thought that was interesting. And I'll just list them off here. There's 7 sins: pride, sloth, gluttony, anger, envy, lust, and greed. And you talk about how screens kind of feed into all of those things. So kind of unpack that for us a little bit.
Sure. Actually, so the phrase "evil by design," that's a book title. The industry, the tech industry, writes and documents their process. People make a living being consultants to companies who build apps. Especially as smaller companies. It's not like, Meta and Google who have the money, as you mentioned, to hire top psychologists and behavioral psychologists, neuroscientists, Microsoft that hires, those people for the video game side. A lot of companies don't have that. So they have to go pick up a book like the rest of us. And so there's this book called Evil by Design, Chris Notter, who writes, he says, evil design must be intentional, which proved my thesis. I say that in the book. But he patterns, I think it's 50 some specific ways to keep people connected to the app you're trying to build, and ask or entice them to take the actions that you want them to take by exploiting the 7 classic deadly sins. These are the 7 deadly sins, just from classic Christian history. And so we think about these things. So you think about, the idea of sloth. We're naturally lazy. So the path of least resistance is a mechanism by which they will entice us. And so when you see on a screen, here's 3 choices for you, and the one in the middle is really big, like, that's a path of least resistance. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Autoplay is the classic one on your streaming video platform. They invented that. Why? Not for your benefit,
right?
But because
so you'd see the next ad.
You'd see the next ad, and then you'd watch the next video, and you don't have to make a decision because you get decision fatigue. right? And they know that, and that's what they do. And we end up doing this often late at night when we're
Yep.
our weakest, when we are our most vulnerable to suggestions and ideas. And it works. It absolutely works. It changes our, and that's why the book title is, talks about shaping our desires. This is changing what we want. We want to spend this time because they've made us want to. And you talk about a wake-up call. That's really what I intended the first 4 chapters to be, is a wake-up call, and almost to rise up within us this righteous indignation, especially as men, right? It's like, if somebody's attacking our family, we're going to get out there and we're going to go after it, right?
Right,
Nobody's
yeah.
going to touch my kids. Well, they're touching your kids.
Right.
They're getting, you know what I mean? They're fighting. Nobody's going to.
And we've opened the door to let them in.
We bought it. We bought it and gave it to them for Christmas. Yeah. and we all did this. And so it's time. 20 years from now, what will they say about this generation that, that we are, but we just didn't know. And so I would say to people, on the other hand, get angry, be angry and yet do not sin, Ephesians says, but be angry,
right?
And do not sin, but be angry. That's a thing.
Yeah.
There are things that the Lord is wrathful about. The Lord hates deception. He hates it. And the messages on our screens are so loaded with deception. You've got to think there's alignment there.
100%. As you were talking to me, you said something that sparked a thought that, how many do people give in to giving their kids smartphones and other types of screens just because of the social pressure?
Oh,
the stigma involved of not having one.
That's right.
That's huge.
That is so huge. It is it's so, the peer pressure is a thing with parents and grandparents. We don't want our kids left out. We don't want our kids to be the ones that are like, not in on what everybody else is chatting about. But I speak to parent groups, I speak to homeschool conventions and things like that. And I tell them the parents that are willing to live counterculturally like that are really going to give their kids superpowers, because they will be the kids that can think for themselves, that have the creativity to solve I hear parents say their kids, even at a younger age, sometimes they don't, our kids, the Bible says your kids will rise up and call you blessed. It doesn't always happen when they're younger. They don't always understand why we're limiting them from whatever it is. But even the younger kids are saying, they look at their friends and those whose parents have kind of limited their exposure to these technologies, and they realize, wow, I have a lot more creativity than my friend does. Thank you. Or, man, I have a lot more peace. Mm-hmm. Or I can, just they recognize the difference. They see their friends, and it is hard. Mm-hmm. But you know what it takes? It really only takes 1 or 2 other close friend families. Like, hey, you know what? Would you be willing? Together. Yeah. Would you be willing to not let's both not do Fortnite,
Yeah.
And just let our kids go play Legos. And could we do that? And that's really all it takes at the root. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but we aren't meant to do this alone. And so if you're literally the only family and your kids think you're Amish or whatever, you're crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
We're not there to be our friends' our kids' best friend. We're there to be our kids' parents. They're and to make them thank us later.
Yeah. You're tapping into an issue or an aspect of this that I really wrestle with, because on one hand, as much as I recognize the slippery slope of screen addiction and how unhealthy it is for our kids, or people in general, but especially kids, there's that side of the coin. But then on the other side of the coin, I look at my son. Mm-hmm. Every single person in his school has a smartphone. That is so ingrained in their culture. Mm-hmm. And taking that away from him, I recognize like the impact that has on his social life.
Sure.
And I guess, I don't know what my question is here, but it's just like, I wrestle with those two sides of the coin. It's like, mm-hmm. There's got to be an answer somewhere in the middle.
Right. Well, I wouldn't say it like that, but because that's a good question. But that I mean, that's where we all live, though. Yeah. I mean, I just want to recognize that you're not alone. Everybody who's listening is facing this at one place or another. So,
right. And I think we recognize it, but there's like, well, I don't know what the answer is, so I'll just let them have the phone.
Right. And so So I would
So
love
how
to
would you
offer
say it?
some.
You said you wouldn't put it like that. How would you say it?
Well, so what I wouldn't say is the middle part.
Okay.
The challenge this word balance is thrown around all the time on these issues. And I really reject the word. And because as a Christian, I'm not called to balance things that aren't good.
Right.
Like if so, and
Like
plus,
work-life balance. There's no such thing.
right. The problem with the word balance is that I'm the most balanced person I know. Like it's all y'all that are nuts. You know what I mean? Like, and we all say that it's we all say that to ourselves, like, because I'm not as all left as they are. I'm not as all right as they are. I'm balanced. So it lets us off the hook.
Sure.
And so in the book, I encourage people to take a posture of surrender, a posture of, Lord, you're King of Kings. I'm your servant. And from that posture, now what does it look like for my family? So because that's the problem. I hit that as a touch point. So I didn't, don't mean to, no offense. I just wanted to push that on that a little bit, but just
I'm totally open to hearing what you have to say, because you're the expert here. And
well, thank you. By the grace of God, I've learned some things, and it's helped some people. And it's helped me and those that I've been able to reach, but it's still
as much as anybody.
Well, and we're all learning along, but in terms of so what do you do for families? What I encourage families to do is to, first of all, say you come to realization, like, you know what, I gave my child a device too early. Okay, what do I do? Well, you don't take it away today, because you'll have a mutiny on your hands. You've got to build a relationship and build the reasons. Now, at some point, they may not be on board with the reasons, and you might have to take it away anyway, because we're not there to be their friend. But it's up to us, mom and dad, to cast this vision for their life. What are we here for? And even if, like, mom and dad, like, you know what, we got off track from our purpose. God has a plan for us, and it doesn't include 8 hours a day on our phones, and we're or even 1 hour a day on our phones. It may not include phones, or whatever it is. It may not include video games. And so we have to have that conversation and say, you know what, we're here for a purpose, and here's our purpose. And so you articulate that. Mm-hmm. And you know what, this is hurting us. And a lot of people aren't living in God's purpose for them, and that's okay. There's no shame on them. It's just we're realizing there's a different way. Mm-hmm. And so again, my friends at Screen Strong have this whole thing of walking families through that. They are able to help. They have a detox process. They have alternatives. So what do you do? So, okay, you don't have your device anymore. What do you do? Well, there's like 50 things they have suggested to replace that. So it's hard, but you're not alone, and there are people doing it. And yeah,
I just wish we heard more about it.
Right? Yeah, I know. And that's where it's, because, as you said, this is not a fun conversation. It's kind of like, man, I really need a budget. But I love going out to eat. And nobody wants to really hear about the financial guy come on and say, you know what, you really need to think about your future. It's the same kind of a thing. It's kind of not a popular, and yet it's right where we all live, and it has such high potential for improving our lives, improving our relationships, improving our homes and our families and the future ultimately.
Yeah. Well, that's the argument you hear so often, is like, well, there's so much good brought into the world because of these screens. Mm-hmm. And that's true. Sometimes they can be a positive tool, but you just have to have the intentionality and the discipline to, not click on the things that are going to take us down a path of evil, or a distraction, mm-hmm. at the very least.
This podcast is part of the Edify Podcast Network. Edify is a faith-inspiring app that brings together thousands of the best Christian podcasts in one place for your listening enjoyment. Cut through the noise and grow your faith by diving into the world's top Christian podcasts today. Download the Edify app for free from the App Store or Google Play, or by going to edify.app. That's EDIFI.app.
I'm going to go back to, there's a section in the book. Well, I'm going to go back to the idea of evil by design, and the founders that kind of create this technology, and the ones who pay the experts to figure out how to make this stuff addictive, and the fact that they knew what they were doing at the time. They know what they're doing now. That's right. I've got an excerpt in the book here. I'm just going to read it. Evan Williams, a founder of Blogger, Twitter, and Medium, bought hundreds of books for his two young sons, but refused to give them an iPad. and Leslie Gold, the founder of an analytics company, imposed a strict no screen time during the week rule on her kids. It seemed as if the people producing tech products were following the cardinal rule of drug dealing: never get high on your own supply. I mean, that just underscores the fact that the dangers are real, and the people behind these products, this content, these platforms, they know it. They know the problems behind it.
They absolutely do, and it is insidious. I think the rank and file people that work there don't necessarily know, but when you read that the leaders, that quote you read is such a good quote. It's from Adam Alter's book, Irresistible, which I cite in my book. Yeah, the leaders of these companies send their kids to schools that have no technology. Like when the private elite private schools in Silicon Valley where they send their kids, all the kids don't have phones there. If they have phones, they don't take them to school. Why? They don't all get Chromebooks. Why? Because they know while they're selling our kids, or they're selling our entire school systems on this technology, and that's a whole other subject. They don't use it because they know, it's the kind of thing that I've done some research on the big tobacco controversies of the past and how the propaganda they used. You see, if you look up big tobacco advertising, they have pictures of doctors smoking. They have pictures of babies being happy to be in secondhand smoke, right? They knew. And not only did they know, they optimized the experience. They made cigarettes more addictive by packing with more nicotine. They added filters to make it so that, you could smoke more. They on and on and on. They made social proof. They enticed women to smoke, which I cite this example in my book, when it was a social taboo, to expand their market share. So what happened? Decades later, they're in front of Congress and, they have to pay all this stuff. But decades, like, is that what it's going to take for us? Will be decades before Mark Zuckerberg's going to be 80 years old, walking in there on his walker, going in front of Congress of the day, going, did you know what you were doing? Yeah, we knew.
Yeah. I hope it's
that's
not
why
that
I'm a trillionaire. No, I hope not too. But you just, if the timelines work, that's kind of our track record, unfortunately.
Another comment in this book that kind of blew my mind. I'm just going to go back to the book here. Look back 20, 30 years ago, and the major corporations, global corporations, were like General Electric, Microsoft, Exxon, Citigroup, Walmart, those types of companies. As opposed to today, our economy is dominated by the companies who fill our eyes and our minds. And that's absolutely true. Google, Facebook, they're all big tech companies.
That's right.
There's been a major shift in 20, 30 years. That's really not that long. And we have we dove in head first, not knowing how deep that pool was. And now we're figuring it out. It's just that when I read that, I was like, wow, that's true. I'd never really thought about it before like that, but.
Right. We don't realize it because it happens so slowly. And yet, slowly because day to day, you don't really think about it. But when you look at you're right. Exactly. 20 years is not that long ago. 9/11 was over 20 years ago. Yeah. Right. And that changed the world. There's all kinds of things that changed the world, but the introduction of the first smartphone in 2007, Facebook in 2007. We don't remember a time when we don't, but there was time before that. And right, they've deformed the economy. They literally have deformed the world economy by exploiting us at the level they have.
I just remember when the first iPod, I guess it was the first iPhone, came out in, I think 2007 or something.
It was 2007.
Yeah. And just being captivated by its elegance. It's a shiny ball, and we're attracted to shiny balls. And I was bought in because it's like, this is really cool. None of us knew where it was going to take us, a decade later. But it's like, I just think about what are the shiny balls now that we're being distracted by, and where are those going to take us? I don't know. Can you think of any examples?
That's such a great question. That you're right. The smartphone was a tremendous milestone. Steve Jobs' vision for incorporating all the things he did, and it blew my mind. I'm a techie nerd. I've been, software developer, so I get into this. I say that in my book.
He's another guy who didn't let his kids have devices.
He did not. He totally did not. They did not have an iPad. It just blows your mind that how many products do people make that, they can't bring home because they're ashamed of it. I'm sure there's a lot of products like that. But when you think about the influence and how many billions and billions and billions of smartphones have been made.
Yeah.
But it's just to your question, like today, I mean, it feels like it's more of the same, the optimization of more of the same, the networking, the connect, like because speeds are so much faster. And like back then, even Wi-Fi wasn't great, data was expensive, video didn't work. Like now it's fully immersive.
Yeah.
And so certainly virtual reality, there's a lot of investment into virtual reality today.
That's what I'm concerned about. Virtual reality and AI. So many people's willingness to just like get plugged in, like literally they're talking about chips, being one with your device.
And Facebook is investing serious money into those technologies. They're betting the farm on it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a thing, and we are embracing it. It blows my mind to see the adoption even of these early immersive technologies. And then what's happening, you start hearing the reports of already in these new metaverse, what's happening, sexual assault, it's immediately like going down to the because people behave differently online, and they're going to behave differently as a fully embodied avatar.
Time out. How does that work? Sexual assault in the metaverse? I had not heard of that. So are there repercussions for that? Like,
so it's, I think they're trying to figure it out. I think they're surprised. I think they end up being surprised, but I don't think they figured that out yet. I think it is absolutely the Wild West, and and unfortunately our baser instincts are what tends to be catered to, the things that bring pleasure. And obviously sexualization is hugely in every aspect of it. So yeah, it was inevitable.
Yeah. And then you think about how desensitized the world has become to porn. The fact that, porn it's always just a tap or two away on your smartphone or device, and how easily accessible it is for our kids. And so like, that's a huge impact on young people, obviously. And then we talk about like their inability to dialogue in person, and how that kind of leads to like a lack of empathy, because all they know is like digital relationships.
That's right.
That scares the heck out of me. Scares the cheese whiz out of me.
Yeah. Thanks to my friend Roger who said that. Yeah, that's so true. The classic, like, people are getting in relationships and breaking up all over text or all over Instagram or whatever. It is. And because, human relationships are hard and complicated, it goes back to the path of least resistance. Online relationships are easy. They're as easy as typing a command or swiping a swipe, and swipe left or swipe right if you like. It's all that kind of stuff. What we're doing right now, face to face, we learned this over time by being those awkward middle schoolers who all right, I have to talk to that person. I don't want to. We pushed through the resistance of the natural things, which are the risk of having a face-to-face conversation with a stranger. That's hard. But what did we do? We built up muscles. We powered through it, and we weren't constantly entertained into thinking that everything had to be easy. It's not easy, but you're right. We've lost as a society a huge, huge amount of empathy and social skills as a result.
Yeah, social skills is such a huge thing. Because I know, like, my son, he's 13. He's not dating.
Sure.
But he thinks he's dating. And I know that whether it's him or his friends, like, people ask each other out via text or whatever.
Sure.
And that's easy. Anybody can do that. It's like getting rejected over a text, no big deal. And they will never experience the sweaty palms of going up to somebody in person and asking them out, and with the fear of rejection. Is like, but that's a life skill that you need to develop.
It is. You've got to have it. You got to have it to get a job interview. You've got to be able to do that, to get a spouse, to make friends. to persuade, to sell, to, all these things are human things that we need human relationship skills to be able to accomplish in life. So absolutely, that is such a thing. And yet we're training them, we're training all of us, we're all being trained to think it should be easy. If it's not easy, we're talking to men today, where men used to be grit and perseverance and strength and endurance. Like, these are the kinds of things that used to define kind of the goal of a man, to want to be able to persevere. Like, I can take it, give me another one, Captain America, I can do this all day. He couldn't if he was on his phone all day, because he'd expect to be able to just order dinner with one click and then watch the shows that he wanted to watch. And if it was too slow, he'd be mad. That's what we're being trained for as a result.
Yeah, it kind of all goes back to that path of least resistance.
It really does.
And again, I keep bringing my son back into this as an example. Sorry, buddy, if you ever listen to this, but I see that in him too. It's like he gets frustrated when things can't happen or just magically appear, like this microwave society that we live in. I think that the digital landscape just kind of feeds into that.
Yes,
and
it does.
We especially see it. I see it. Everybody sees it on Facebook, the mocking culture, especially when you get into like politics.
Oh, yes.
Just the uncivil discourse in general. And kids aren't going to know anything different when it comes to that, maintaining a civil discourse. It's just, that doesn't even, I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but I don't know, help me out here. How do we get them to overcome this challenge of not being able to have a civil discourse in society? Because I think that's another life skill that we're losing.
Such a good question. It is, we're losing it. Again, I always point back to, we're losing it intentionally. The algorithms are optimized for outrage. Outrage is among the most profitable ways to keep us engaged. And some people that don't realize that, because their feeds are filled with positive quotes and things, because that's who they follow. But the vast majority of social media, especially, get to 2024 and the elections. Actually, there's elections this year, right? But back to 2020, by the time when another presidential election comes on, what it's like. It's insane. But again, it's optimized for that. We're being pulled into that. So the answer is intentionality. But what does that look like in terms of this? And to me, it looks like no screens at dinner at home. Like, in terms of at home, no screens at dinner at home, and we have conversations with each other. And those conversations maybe involve things we might disagree about. Like, what do you think we should do for X, Y, and Z? Or how do you think we should process? Or maybe even asking a little bit of hard questions like, how do you know that there's a God? By looking at the universe. Someone asks some big questions, and let's have a conversation. And maybe a child at the table goes, I'm not really sure I'm on board with all this stuff. Oh, really, buddy? That's really cool. That's interesting. Let's talk about that. And we model it. And mom and dad model it. Mom and dad model it to our kids. We have conversations, and maybe even we don't have all of our arguments in secret. We're like, hey, we're having a discussion, and we love each other, and we disagree. And then the church, they will know you are Christians by our love for each other. And even when we disagree, like, those are all opportunities to model and show because the only modeling, if the only modeling is online, then you're right. That's all they'll see. That's all they'll know. But if they actually see mom and dad, when I was at home, mom and dad would kind of get into it sometimes, but I always knew they loved each other. Or we could talk about anything at the table. I could say, I thought up was down, and we'd have that conversation, and it was okay. Yeah. And I think that's part of the secret sauce that we as families, it sounds so basic, but it's just not happening because there's screens.
Yeah. You touched on a key tactic, I think, and that is asking questions. I think that a lot of guys, we'll use the dinner table as an example. We sit down and that's kind of the time where we have conversations. And for myself, that's a time where it's an opportunity for me to impart wisdom to my kids. And so I do that through talking to them. But like you said, so often you can achieve the same result by asking questions and then just listening and having a conversation rather than just lecturing them.
That's right. And it's so easy. You know, we tuned out our parents and they tune us out. Yeah, dad, whatever. I know. But you're exactly right. When you're asking the questions, and we ask good questions and open-ended, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? Have you considered this? And being okay and not being shocked. Like, that's one of the things, that's one of the little parenting skills, you know, is like, you know, not making that, oh my goodness, you said what? No, you can tell me anything. And I've had my adult kids come and tell me, you know, Dad, I've got something hard to tell you, but I know you always told us you could tell us anything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, thank you, Lord, that at least that got through.
Yeah. I feel blessed in that way too. I've told my son from as soon as he was able to understand the words I was saying, buddy, you can always tell me anything. And now, again, as a middle schooler, 13 years old, he'll tell me things where, like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I wish you wouldn't have told me that. But
right.
I'm like, but I'm glad you told me. Let's have let's talk about that. Yeah. And usually that's an opportunity to maybe correct some misinformation that he's received, whether it's from friends or at school. And we definitely want to have those conversations rather than just relying on them getting all their info about life from these devices right here.
That's right.
Doug, I feel like I could talk about this for another hour. It's fascinating. It's scary. It's an important topic. And I want to make sure that people go get a copy of this book. So where can people find it, and where can people find you online?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm Doug Smith is a very common name. So my website is That Doug Smith, THAT. Oh, I'm That Doug Smith.
Oh, That Doug Smith.
Oh, That Doug Smith. So thatdougsmith.com is really where everything's at. You can find the book there. You can reach out to me. I have discussion questions. This makes a really good, church group study or small group study of some kind. So people go through it, and I'm happy to send like discussion questions and help in any way that I can. I love, this is, God asked me to do this, and I really feel called by God to speak into this conversation in this vital time. So love to hear from you and reach out, and any questions you have, I'd love to help you.
That's awesome. Doug, last question for you. And I didn't prep you for this, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but we talk about legacy on this show a lot. So when you hear the phrase to leave an inspired legacy, what does that mean to you? And maybe what does that mean to you through the lens of this conversation?
Oh, that's such a great question. And really, it's the reason for the book. When you think about legacy, we've been talking about the future. What are people going to remember us by? Are they going to remember me as the person that was unavailable because I was addicted to some screen? Or are they going to remember me as someone who was safe and open and who they could come to and talk to about issues? For me, our legacy as Christians in the broader sense is we have a message, we have a countercultural message that our culture is literally dying for. They are dying to hear that there's another way besides living on the treadmill of constant connection. And where can they find that but us? Jesus said, my burden is light, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Follow me, follow him. And those who will leave a legacy to this generation will be those who are the real deal and live that out and live a different way in front of our kids, in front of our coworkers, in front of this desperately needy world, to show that, there is a different way. And those Christians, man, they love each other and they're full of peace because they're not like everybody else. And that's where my heart is in terms of leaving a legacy.
Yeah. Love it, man. Great answer. Guys, check out this book. It's called Unintentional. Doug, I really appreciate this book, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be able to have this conversation. It was great.
Guys, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation, share it with a friend and subscribe to the show so you don't miss future episodes like the one you heard today. And be sure to check today's show notes for all the ways you can stay plugged into the Inspired Legacy, including my free download called 9 Ways to Be a Better Dad. You can sign up for my free weekly devotional called Inspired Inbox. And you can join the private Facebook group, a community of other like-minded men looking to become the best husbands and fathers they can be. So get plugged in, Like, subscribe, leave a review, and help more guys find the show because we need more men battling together for the sake of the next generation. Until next time, live inspired.